it seemed like the conversation we had was people value autonomy. People don't value autonomy the way they say they do. I think you probably agree that people value some level of autonomy. I figure it'd probably be useful for us to like arrive at a definition of that. And then from there, it's just a matter of like figuring out what level. I mean, we're not really working with data. Like we're both kind of just working on our feelings of how much we think the average person values autonomy.
Yeah,
But
I
it
guess
seems
like,
oh, go ahead, please.
yeah, I mean, like it feels like probably some level of autonomy makes us feel good in society. I imagine we wouldn't want to live like on a robot schedule or something. Um, but I think that people in general vastly overvalue autonomy, and they use autonomy as a substitute for what they're actually looking for. So like the ability to live like a happy, healthy life when you're working a nice job and you have like a nice family, you do fun things. I think that people substitute in autonomy for this, or they think that autonomy will lead them there. So they think that they value the autonomy, but what they really value is what they think they can use autonomy to get. Is generally what I think.
Okay, so I think this may be where we disagree because I do think that people like value autonomy and make decisions just to preserve the idea of being able to make choices that they don't feel that they're able to make now, and that they will trade off like material benefit or even. I think a lot of people would claim we got to this a little bit on that panel, but I think people would claim to forego like a perfect or what would be considered like more comfortable outcomes or even what they would prefer as better outcomes if it meant that they had to forego or give up like the ability to change their mind in the future or something like that.
I wish there was like a way to test this.
So you used a video game analogy the last time we talked, where if you drop somebody into like this giant sandbox experience and don't give them any tutorials, they'll get discouraged and they end up, hating it, which is something I can certainly understand. But I think the inverse is true, where if you had like one of the reasons I think people like Dark Souls games or like Souls likes or roguelikes is because the probability to fail is so high and those games are so expandable and there's so many different ways to interact with them. It may be the case that a lot of people who interact with those games don't really know how best to interact with them. Whereas if you had a system, if we're going to use like the explosion principle or something, where like the game physically stops, it pauses and tells you exactly which button, like it's a stop and go sort of quick time event. And the result is that you get a perfect outcome. You get like a perfect speed run no hit game in Dark Souls or something like that every time. But you have to follow the prompts on screen, and the game won't let you fail otherwise. Obviously, that's not a game that people would be interested in playing.
I think that, yeah, so I understand the analogy. So I'm going to fight back and I'm going to call this disanalogous because I think that in this particular thing, failing or losing is like part of the process of winning. And like you need to have some of that failure for the win to feel good. But I don't think that that's the same in real life. So like in a video game, if I lose, well, for me personally, if I lose 100 times on a section and then I win at the end, that feels really good. But in real life, I don't want to be hungry for a week and then get a good meal on Sunday, or I don't want to fail like 20 classes and then finally pass the last class. I just want that stuff to go like really well the first time. So I feel like the desire, I feel like in a way, I'm trying to think, I don't know if I can say this 100%, but I almost feel like that analogy actually works exactly against you there, because I would argue that people are introducing autonomy in those games simply because they need to introduce the challenge because that's part of the game. But in real life, they would want exactly the opposite of that. They wouldn't want those challenges to pop up. Like if we had to choose in real life, would you rather like real life be more like, I can't think of an easy fucking game. Would you rather real life be like Stardew Valley, or would you rather real life be like Dark Souls? I think 99% of people would be like, I'd rather real life would be like Stardew Valley than I die, right? That's
I would rather
extreme, but yeah.
Of course, but this is now a conversation about like challenge and stakes and not about like autonomy and being able to choose the way that you interact with, the game or like reality in this case. Like, I feel like when people desire autonomy, it's almost a concession that maybe as individuals, we don't even know exactly what we want or how to get there. And that like, when we're talking about systems anyway, we're talking about not creating systems that confine us like Stalin socialism or Marxist Leninism or something, where our lives are mostly dictated for us, but we're promised like good outcomes for it. And that people kind of want an ability to not know exactly what they want out of life and just sort of like figure that out and maybe even backtrack a little bit and work a different way.
Here's like, so this is, okay, I'm about to gishgal the fuck out of you, and then tell me if you like hate this or I'm open. I don't feel like super strongly about this. I'm open to having my mind change, and I wish people would be different. But like, when I look at the freedom of choice that we have in today's society, it is fucking massive. But then when I look at how people participate in society, it seems like they like the idea of autonomy rather than like actually exercising it. So for example, When people go to restaurants, they tend, even if there's hundreds of restaurants in the area, they tend to visit the same restaurants. And when they go to a restaurant they like, they tend to order the same thing every time. They'll ignore 100 items on the menu to always order the same thing they like over and over again. When somebody goes to a grocery store, there's 200 different types of cereal to choose from. They'll always get the same exact box of cereal, or maybe a second one sometimes. When people go to the store to buy clothes, they're always buying whatever the most popular fashions are. You could wear theoretically an infinite number of combination of garments, but it's always going to be like what is like the trendy thing right now. When people go to buy, like, whether it's cars, and the types of colors we choose are cars, but like, it feels like in almost every single area of our life, we love the idea of saying there's like a million things to choose, but people tend to stay within a very, very, very narrow subset of choices. And so it feels like the concept of the autonomy is like comforting and it feels good, but the exercising of that autonomy is like just never done. That's what it feels like to me.
Okay. Well, so I don't know. I guess I've perceived that to be true in some cases. I guess I kind of consider that a matter of interest. And some of that may be the confines of the systems that we live in, or like the result of the confines that exist within the system. Like the idea of moving out of your comfort zone or like living in different places, like it's hard for me to understand because like personally, I don't know if I'm Bill Dipperly or whatever, but like I've very much been against that. I've cut like a weird path in life. And like, for example, when I go to restaurants, it's very important to me to always order something or nearly always order something that I've never tried before. And that like my reasoning for doing this is because it's led me to discover things that I enjoy on levels that I may not have been able to predict, or that I enjoy on levels more than things that I'm used to or whatever. But like whether or not this is most people, it may just be a matter of interest. I feel that way about food, but I don't feel that way about, well, there are things I don't feel that way about. I maybe don't feel that way about music. I'm not particularly passionate about discovering new music. Mm-hmm. Maybe some people feel that way about Netflix, but you know, like when it comes to maybe food tourism or like real life tourism, like or careers or something like that. Careers is an easy one to draw a parallel to because, you know, like the way that life works in this country is that you have to establish yourself at a young age, train for a specific type of job if you want to be able to have the resources to raise a family and whatnot. And like any time spent deviating from a certain path, or you're led to believe that time spent deviating from a certain path may cause you to lose out or not be able to achieve like the basic things that you want to achieve or something. But in reality, I think it may be the case that, you know, like if people had more resources, you know, I don't think it's a coincidence that people who have more resources tend to be more adventurous.
I don't know if that's even necessarily true. I guess maybe sometimes they will be, but it feels like most people fall into like very rigid patterns. Like, I might be just poisoned with anecdote here, but like a funny example that I can think. How old are you? Or what about age?
I'm 35.
35. Did you go to college?
I went to a couple times.
Okay, sure. I flunked out when I was in third year, so I don't feel bad. So like one of the things that I remember was like, this is so funny to me. This is just the funniest thing in the world when I noticed this. Is that when we go for me in high school, I went to a private high school, so I had assigned seating. So everybody had to sit in the exact same seat every time. When you go to college, one of the coolest things you see is you don't have assigned seating anymore. Anybody can sit anywhere they want for the entirety of whatever you want to sit. That's like, and it was like the coolest thing in the world. But then what you realize is that like on day 2, you sit in the same seat, and then on day 3, and it actually gets to where every single person in class more or less sits in the exact same spot. And it's even at such a point that if you were to go and take somebody else's seat, people would like look at you like, what the fuck are you doing? Even though there's no assigned seating. And I know that these are all like these small, like one-off examples, but like I see so many times where people can like exercise a lot of freedom or autonomy, but you are so socially pressured into picking like in a very narrow band of choices. It just, I don't know. I always viewed it as like, I don't know if this is like an American contradiction or a Western contradiction or a capitalist contradiction, that people always say that they want freedom and freedom and freedom and freedom, but there's still very much like a highly commodified, highly commercialized, very narrow band of choices that you can make that all have to fall into whatever like pop culture is currently telling you to do, or whatever other environment you exist in. That's what it feels like.
Maybe. I understand that feeling, but I also think, I tried to highlight this the other night as well, where a person choosing to eat Pop-Tarts for breakfast every morning may also be an exercise of their autonomy. They may feel social pressures to try different things. Their significant other might say, you always eat Pop-Tarts for breakfast, have a waffle or some shit like that. And, you know, when you confront people with their habits and like try to make it out like their habits are lame, you often hear that defense, like, no, I like this. I know that I like this. At what point can we consider that it's them like exercising autonomy to like make the same choice, you know?
Yeah, I guess it's possible. Maybe we just have different views of it, or maybe I would push somebody. It just, I guess like that, it's a little bit ironic to me because like I could like I, basically, so like let's say that I approach somebody and I'm like, dude, you live the most rigid life in the world. So you wake up in the morning on the Sleep Number mattress that you got because you've seen it advertised to you 50 million times. And then you get in your car and you turn on the radio and you're listening to whatever the number one chart was on YouTube that day. And then you drive the car, you drive the Honda Civic, the most popular car.
A Ford F-150, because that's what Dave
Or a Ford
drives.
F-150 or a Chevy Silverado. Yeah, you drive that to work.
Right.
And then at the end of the day, like, and I can go through like a million of these examples. At the end of the day, you get home and it's like, wow, dude, like, where's your autonomy? And it's like, whoa, I just chose to do the most popular thing in every single category of my life, but at least I got to choose it. And I mean, technically, you're right. And you could argue that I'm being reductionist. Well, okay, Destiny, like, okay, you can still choose things that are popular. Maybe most people just choose the things that are most popular. It's like, I guess kind of. But at that point, like, what is the autonomy actually? Like, if I were to eliminate 95% of choices from people's lives, they wouldn't even notice it. Now, you mentioned that you might be an outlier. I think I'm an outlier for a lot of things, but I mean, like, we're streamer people, so of course we're going to be somewhat outliers. So, like, the thing that you said about food is cool, that you challenge yourself. I try to do that. When I'm on DoorDash, like, okay, what's a restaurant I haven't ordered from before? Like, I try to keep this kind of stuff in mind and challenge yourself. Or I try to do it sometimes with music, too, because I can get into the habit of listening to the same songs over and over and over. It's like, okay, well, can I add something new? Can I listen to something new? But for a lot of people, if you eliminated 98% of the choices in their lives, they actually wouldn't notice. Their life is so fucking rigid that they wouldn't notice anyway, but they'd still feel like they have full autonomy.
I understand this. I understand this argument perfectly, but I guess where I get caught up in is that I personally kind of concede that maybe like their choice to not deviate, like the idea that they ought to deviate is like an ought that that you may be extrapolating onto those individuals, and like their refusal to succumb to that may be an exercise of their autonomy or something like that.
Well, but like that's what I guess that's like central to our disagreement, I guess. And maybe this might actually just purely be semantic. When I think of autonomy, that's kind of what I would imagine, is autonomy is the ability to deviate. Like that, like autonomy means that I could choose to do something different. That's what it really is. I'm not being given some rigid guideline that's commanding me to do something. Like I have the ability to do something different. But if everything you choose in life is like what's being fed to you in this most popular thing, like the lack of deviation in every arena of your life is like, well, damn, where's the autonomy there? That's, I guess, how I view it.
Okay, so I guess, I think I would have defined it in a similar way, but I think that's an important distinction to make because like in these cases, I would, I guess, point to a definition of autonomy that says that autonomy means that a person has the capability to interact exactly on their own terms or whatever those terms may be, give or take different levels of restriction or something like that. So even a person choosing to eat chicken noodle soup 100 times in a row or something like that, like they're doing so on their own terms. Like they are doing that because they have the autonomy to do so, because, you could imagine a system where they have to rotate meals and they may hate that,
Yeah, for sure, I guess. But what if you had like a group of 100 people and you got like their aggregate set of like preferences, like you figured out like what they like for meals and what they like to drive for cars, blah, 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 blah. Like if you removed all of their autonomy, or rather you removed all the other choices and you just gave them the option to buy those things and they weren't aware of it, they'd probably just do it and feel good though, no? Like they'd feel like, oh yeah, this is cool. Like I feel like I'm making choices, blah, 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 blah. Like even if there wasn't like a universe that existed in any part outside of like their narrow like band of experience, they'd still feel like they have like absolute control. I'm phrasing this really poorly. To center back on what I said initially, it feels like we say that we value autonomy, but I think what we really value is the illusion of autonomy. Like we like to feel like we're making choices. We like to feel like we're in control of our lives. But at the end of the day, people are just quote unquote choosing the things that are being fed to them, such that like if every other choice was eliminated, they wouldn't even know it because they never would choose something different anyway. So like, what is the value of autonomy at that point? I don't know. It's just like, that's how I view it, I guess.
I think that can be true independently of like valuing autonomy. I think it can be true that like people often, I think, falsely attribute their success or their place in life to decisions that they feel that they made like on their own gumption. And when in reality, they were kind of just like, barely deviating their path down this system of chutes and ladders or something like that. But I think they can also value autonomy for the things that they just find important and their ability to interact with those things on their own terms or something like that. Like, how many times have you heard the anecdotes of people who come to the United States from like South America or like the Balkan states or Soviet states or prior Soviet states, and they talk about like, oh man, we would hate socialism here in this country because my parents escaped that shit. It was terrible. Like having the choice to go to whatever doctors, like people that may ignore the actual state of how easy it is to get medical care, like the quality of their own medical care, how their own insurance may, limit their access to those things or whatever. But like, maybe truly in their heart, they may even recognize those things. But like, I'm sorry, I don't know where I was going with that one.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, I don't know. I think that I think it's like a very Western idea that people are like hyper obsessed with autonomy, but I think that there are more important things. To some level, I'm sure that like autonomy is important, or people seem to like value it. There's probably some true value there, but I think that we hyper fixate on it sometimes. And I feel like there are so many more important things that are worth providing for in our life than autonomy, is just how I feel, I guess. But this isn't like, I don't have like I'm not like hugely married to this idea. It just came up as part of the conversation we were having.
Yeah, that's kind of why I wanted to reach out and talk to you about it, because it seemed like we were kind of poking and prodding around. And, I'm happy to hear that you weren't like wed to any positions. I wasn't sure I was either. I think as Americans, it's probably an important conversation to have because it is so central to the discourse, and like trying to figure this out is probably important to us, like having conversations with anybody politically.
Sure. Did you ever heard of a game called EVE Online?
I have.
Have you ever played it all?
Oh my Lord. I almost don't want to talk about it because it's such a like silver bullet to me in my argument, because it aligns perfectly with what you were talking about, dropping you in this universe that's loaded with choices. And I played it for like 2 minutes and I was like, this is just too much, and I quit.
Oh, sure. Well, if you play, so I would argue, of course, if you continue to play, it also would even further my choice, to where what happens is you get dropped into Eve. There's a million things you could potentially do. You don't, who the fuck knows? And then what everybody ends up doing is they end up reading a guide, and then they end up doing like exactly as a guide writes for them to do. That. And that's how, yeah. And I understand you might.
Rule.
Yeah. But,
I won't read FAQs.
Sure. But like for a lot of people, like that's like just the simplest way of understanding things. But they like the idea of being dropped in. And Eve players will even brag about that, because if you go and talk to anybody that's played Eve for a lot, they'll even say like, oh no, Eve is so cool because you can do fucking anything you want. It's so cool. But then when you actually like get into the game, it's like, well, there's like two things. You can go into
the meta.
Yeah, you can join a corp and be an F1 warrior if you want. You can try to scam people in Jita. I don't know if even you're allowed to do that anyway. That might be that against the rules. You can be like a trader if you want to run your spreadsheets all day. There's not a billion things for you to do, because everybody's too scared to like go outside of the norm. Like, or at least it was like four years ago. I think they've changed up a lot of how it works. So maybe the solve and everything changed it. But like, yeah, I remember that at I remember like that's like, I feel like a strong example in my arena. Not to say that like proves a point or anything, but yeah, a lot of this is like anecdotal or like qualitative, so it's hard for me to like say like definitively.
Have you ever heard of the X series of games? X Beyond the Frontier, X2 The Threat, X3 Reunion?
No.
Okay, so these are basically what I would call like single player versions of Eve. And I guess when I try to recall my experience with Eve, I was kind of just like annoyed with like the point and click style of combat, and just sort of like hit numbers and wait, like that typical MMO dry style of combat. It's not terribly satisfying for me. I grew up on fighting games, so it's like not enough sensory overload. Did you just say oof?
Well, I can imagine you going from fighting games, which are arguably the most like mechanics involved games, to MMOs, which are arguably the least mechanics involved games. So yeah, I can imagine the pain.
Okay.
I came from an RTS background, so I also share. I don't know, you would argue which one is more mechanically intense, but both are very mechanically intense games. So going from RTS to like MMOs is like a fucking snore fest, where it's like, oh, I hope I have a strong enough chess piece to win the game, instead of like me actually pushing buttons making that big of a difference. Yeah.
Let me walk over to that board and press 1, 2, 3, 4 and watch myself slash the air and a number pop up 3 seconds later.
Yeah, it's
a
different experience. Yeah.
So the X series is kind of like Eve, but it's a more contained universe, and it's entirely single player, but it's like an empire builder that you can sort of interact with. It's all entirely in first person. So you can like walk onto your ship, fly and pilot your ship, and eventually like get to the point where you've got like an empire of trade ships that you can sort of dock with, walk around at any given time, capital ships that have drones that you can dispatch, and you can sort of play it like it's an FPS or like a space shooter or like a space trader game or an RTS, and end up like taking over systems and stuff. And I don't know, I guess to sort of counter my experience with Eve, I do think that was more a matter of the combat not being terribly, X4 is definitely a game. X4 is the most recent one. That's a game that's like, if you don't know what's going on, it's not very user friendly. The quality of life is like kind of difficult to contend with. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe again, I guess that may be a thing that I'm just interested in. But the hypothetical you drew up the other day about the 10 different realities, and the one where you have the least autonomy, like ending up with the best possible outcomes, and the other 9, you're free to make choices, but you'll never reach as high a quality of life as you would in 10.
Mhm.
It reminded me of, have you ever seen what was it, Rollerball from the 70s or 80s? I think
No.
70s.
Nope.
Oh, okay. It's long and it's boring, as most sci-fi from that era is, but it's kind of interesting, and it's basically, that's kind of the theme of that movie, is that it's about this sports star who plays this like really terribly graphic and violent, sport called rollerball, and it's kind of like the whole world exists in like a sockdom paradise state where like megacorps own everybody and everybody's like really comfortable. The megacorps sort of like provide for everybody and everybody's really comfortable. And this pro athlete has like everything made for him. Like they swap out a new wife for him every couple of years. He lives in this super mansion. Like he never has to pay for anything. He's pampered, but it kind of like gnaws at him. And that's basically the theme of the movie, is that like over the course of the movie, it just gnaws at him more and more. And he like tries to like make these small requests to his fucking sockdom overlords or whatever, the megacorp overlords. And they kind of deny him here or there, but they say, but we provided you so much here, there, and there. And it gnaws at him to the extent that he eventually kind of like, the movie, well, I won't ruin it for you, but it might be worth a watch. I don't know if you're into like old sci-fi movies, but this is fiction. But I thought this was kind of it.
Well, more
like,
recently, have you ever seen like the Matrix movies?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, it sounds similar to this. Doesn't the architect describe that like the reason why the first few iterations of the Matrix failed is because humans need to be able to choose to be miserable or something, right?
I don't remember that part. I was probably too young. Like when I was a kid, I haven't seen those movies since they came out. And like when you're young, your comprehension is shit. Like,
yeah, you're watching them for way different reasons. Yeah. Okay,
have a good day.
Yeah, I love you. Be careful, buddy. Remember to hit that like and subscribe, and don't forget the notification bell so that my videos show up right in your feed.
Okay, if Mr. Mitten leaves, I'm going to. Just so you know.
Okay, bye, Felicia.
I thought you're not gonna fight for me.